Hi, I'm Holly, I'm a writer, and I thought I would just do a quick video talking about some of the non-fiction books that I've read that I want to read, why I read them, what I thought about them. These are ones specifically that I've enjoyed. The read ones, I'm not going to talk about ones that I haven't enjoyed much. But I basically realised that I've been really stupid by ever since I was a kid. I read the Horrible Histories books and whatnot as a kid, where they're non-fiction but they're supposed to be easy to enjoy. I've always loved documentaries ever since I was very young. Like, I would sit in front of the TV and watch a documentary about something super serious and depressing, and I would be like, yeah, this is entertainment. And I remember a lot of the stuff that I read because I really love history. I love learning about stuff generally, and I think that it therefore doesn't make a lot of sense that I have not been reading nonfiction for a really long time. But I started kind of last year to actually read more nonfiction. And so my current nonfiction shelf, apart from like a few that are dispersed elsewhere, are taking up about 1.5 of my shelves. So I would like more. I have a huge list, especially because one of the books that I'm thinking of writing, um, I've written a book about Formula One. I'm planning to write 3 books total in that series. So a lot of the books that I plan on reading are books about Formula One, books that will help me gain an insight into what it's like in that sphere, because I am not in Formula One. I'm not a driver. I'm not a sciencey person, so I have no way of knowing actually what it's like. And it's never going to be fully accurate, but I would at least like it to have like the basic facts right. And so I've just been reading quite broadly to get as solid a perspective as I possibly can on that, on how it works. I also am writing my vampire story, which is set in Romania in the 1970s. And so I've got some research that I want to do for vampires, which I'm also like going to be reading Dracula for the first time because I've never read that. And like other books to see how they deal with the vampire situation, but also non-fiction books, learning about vampire lore, what parts I want to adopt, maybe learn why so that I can maybe have it be, you know, more detailed in a sort of way that makes sense rather than just like me showing off my knowledge. That's, I think, is something that's really important to me, is having a greater understanding, not just of what, but also of why, so that I can go from the why to create my own what's rather than just following what is set for me. I also then have the next project that I will be working on, which kind of came out of nowhere. But for the past few months, I have really wanted to write a book set during the Second World War, probably from the perspective of a soldier. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me what I wanted that to be. And then I was reading one of these books and I suddenly was just like, I know what I want to do. And then that idea has evolved a little bit. But it's going to be the next thing that I write because I'm really excited by it. So yeah, all of the books that I've written so far have needed at least some level of research. I think every book that you write ever needs research, to be fair, but these are some books that I've read recently, since discovering that I do in fact really like nonfiction and that I actually am in a huge nonfiction kick. I've been very kind to myself and I forced myself to take a break. So I'm currently reading The Man in the Iron Mask, which is, I think it's the last book on my list, my like casual TBR list that I did. So I'm taking a break from nonfiction so that I don't get burnt out, and then when I finish that I will let myself read another nonfiction. So that's my plan, because I have been reading a lot of it. I read 2 books in a row and they were pretty thick ones. Or did I read 3 in a row? I might have read, well, I've read a lot in the past like month basically. So I'm gonna start with the stuff that I have read already, and I'm gonna go with David Grant, and this is the only one that I currently own, is The Wager, which is about a shipwreck. It was a ship called The Wager, and the ship shipwrecked, and the crew was divided. There were different factions of this crew. There was a mutiny, and whatnot, and so it doesn't tell you what to feel about these things. It very specifically, the author, I think in the author's like prologue, yeah. So he says, "I've tried to present all sides, leaving it to you to render the ultimate verdict, history's judgment." So it basically just lays out all of the facts based off of what we can glean objectively about the accounts that were given by the crew, and tries to give some context. This author also wrote, as it says at the very top, Killers of the Flower Moon, which is about the birth of the FBI, and there was a Native American group of people who were victimized by greedy oil executives, basically, and so there was murder of I think it was the Osage tribe. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff about that. I read that as an audiobook, because it was available at my local library, and I didn't quite want to read this yet, but I wanted to see maybe more of his work, and I really did enjoy that. So I'm actually, for like my birthday, for Christmas, which are both in the second half of the year, I have put on my list of like stuff that I want, both that book, Killers of the Flower Moon, but also The Lost City of Z. I mentioned this before that I really hate that letter, but basically he has another book called The Devil and Sherlock Holmes, which I'm not too interested in, but those other ones, again, I want a copy of Killers of the Flower Moon because I've read it and I liked it. This one I did also like, and it's a very agreeable style for me, like the way that he writes non-fiction. It's like a story, but also it's very textual, so you get to learn a lot whilst also not feeling necessarily like you're being bogged down with loads of details, which I really liked. But yeah, I highly recommend him, and I think that the things that he's covered are quite interesting and quite wide-ranging, and I think I'm especially excited for the other one that I haven't read of him, so I'm hoping that I get those for my birthday, Christmas, whatever. This is related to the World War II book that I'm gonna be writing. I've technically started research for it because this is one that's going to require me to do a lot of research before I start writing, because like with the Formula One and even the Romania one, the vampire one, it is going to be a lot easier for me to go back and correct stuff on that, because like I can easily go back and be like, oh yeah, this isn't super accurate. But when you're writing a story that is literally based off of real stuff that happened and not entirely fictionalized events, you need to know before you go in so that you get your timeline straight, because otherwise you're gonna have to do huge rewrites. This is probably gonna give away, well, I've decided to do 2 books focusing on 2 people, brothers, 2 different brothers, who, one of them is in the parachute division, and the other is not. So this is Sky Warriors, and it's British Airborne Forces in the Second World War. This was really interesting. I just read this. You can maybe see the spine is like because it's a hefty book. It's about 600 pages. And I read every single bit of this. Like I read the introduction, I carefully looked over all of the maps. I even read the postscript and the acknowledgements. Like I went through every single piece of this because it was really interesting. It was really interesting to read about all of these individuals, learn about the formation, about the assaults that they did, and to actually learn about them in detail, because it doesn't just discuss like the ones that went well either, and it's got this huge, like, this has been massively helpful for further research for me, because I find that books are really easy because you can keep them to hand, but I've also decided that when I've written those books, I want to keep a list of every book that I used, every resource that I used to learn more about them. So that people who are interested in the history, as well as reading a fictional story about the war, can go and read a bunch of fiction, but also non-fiction, that give information about these things, so that they can learn about the real people. Because it is the creation of the airborne, like, parachute division and also the glider division was really interesting, and it was really significant in the war. And regardless of what, you know, the military is like today, I think that I'm hoping it's pretty obvious that I'm actually anti-war. I don't believe that war is a good thing. I don't think that's something that I should have to say, but there are a lot of people who don't agree with that, and those people are getting very vocal at the moment. But I think it's just generally very interesting to learn about the real people that shaped a lot of the stories that we're familiar with. I mean, the reason why I'm kind of back in my World War II kick is because I watch Saving Private Ryan, and every now and then I watch something or I hear like a song, and all of a sudden my brain is just like, hey, do you remember this thing that you were obsessed with? Let's be obsessed with it again. So that's why I'm in it, and specifically the parachute people who, you know, jumped out of planes into combat, they absolutely fascinate me. And the next book is also about parachute people partially, but it's specifically about D-Day and Sword Beach, and that's why it's called Sword by Max Hastings. You can see the sticker, which I haven't taken off. It is signed. Oh my god. This I really enjoyed. This is the book I think that I was reading when I had the idea. I don't know. I don't remember. It feels like it was ages ago that I came up with this idea, because I have literally wanted to write a story about the Second World War for ages. And I just have never known what I was supposed to write it about. Sorry, I had a cat hair on my lip, because there's cat hair everywhere because it's that time of year. But yeah, I read this. I saw that it was a signed copy, so I decided to just buy it because it was signed, and I was like, you know what, it feels pretty perfect that a book about D-Day would show up after I've just redeveloped a fixation on it. Like, okay. And this, again, it says on the back, it's a Daily Mail quote, so take it with a grain of salt, you know. Take it with a grain of salt. But reads like a thriller is often said about good non-fiction accounts of war adventures. And I agree with that. I think it's the same with the David Grann ones, where I was like, it doesn't necessarily read like non-fiction, but at the same time you still are able to process it as non-fiction. This is the same. Sky Warriors was a little bit more information-y, like there was a lot of mention of like specific regiments and whatnot. This one talks about a overall everything that happened relating to Sword. The landings before the sea landings, like the parachutes, the gliders that were deployed inland, and then the actual beach people, the people on the ocean waiting, you know, the Navy. It was really interesting, and I think that it was genuinely very fun to read. Like, it obviously it's not fun because it's like a piece of history that was really tragic, but it was a book that, as somebody who loves history, it was like, yes. I actually have a few more of his now on my list, because I think when you do find, as I said, somebody who, you know, their non-fiction is like really enjoyable to read rather than it being like a slog. It makes sense that you would kind of jump on that. And he has a bunch of stuff, including one that is just generally about D-Day. Some about like, he has one about the Dam Busters, and I think there's also a few other books that I quite want to read that I don't own yet, but they're on my list, so I will hopefully get those for my birthday or something. Yeah, to flit over again to non-war stuff, this book I am pretty sure I've talked about already, but it's How to Win a Grand Prix by Bernie Collins. You can see that there are, well, maybe you can see that there are some tabs in this book. Let me see what one of them is. Okay, so it's just stuff that Bernie Collins, for anyone who doesn't know, was she worked for a Formula One team, right? And now she just is like a presenter who gives insight into strategy because she was a strategist. But she has been trained in other stuff also. And so her insight into Formula One, this was simultaneously like an enjoyable book to read, like it was written in an engaging way. But it also was very informative. And while there are only like 5 sticky tabs, there was a lot of stuff in this that I read that has stuck with me, and it informed the way that I wrote my Formula One story and the way that I like made little edits, and just generally made me more confident on it. And I think it's nice because it tells you a bit more about like the team structure and the way that the team works with each other and who's in charge of what and blah blah blah. And this to me was what I was hoping the Inside Mercedes book was going to be. I didn't like that much. It had its moments, but I feel like it was very inflated. It wasn't super readable. And I feel like it just wasn't as informative as I was hoping. Like it read kind of like it was talking to people who are very new to Formula One. And as somebody who is writing a book about Formula One, that's not what I need. So that one was really good, and I would fully recommend it. All of those I recommend. But yeah, that's kind of it for the ones that I have read. I only picked those 4. I've read more, obviously, but I feel like I don't want to just be like, and this is good, and this is good, because I don't want to spoil it. Like, I know that it's not you can't really spoil nonfiction because it's like fact, you know? But also, I don't want to be like, and this is exactly what happens, because I feel like these people who've written these things are professionals who've done a lot of research and put a lot of time in. And I'm just going to say now, they are very enjoyable to read and they're interesting. So if you have an interest in those areas, I recommend, and you go read them and you enjoy it for yourself. I can't like hype up nonfiction, really. Books that I want to read, this I'm quite excited about. This is the Paratrooper Training Pocket Manual. This is basically, so this features original manual diagrams and illustrations. It gives historical context and whatnot. But basically, first of all, this looks really cute, I think. Like, this is just a cute little book with the really old-fashioned war style propaganda type stuff. But basically, if I open this up, you can see the contents, which so there's recruitment and training, airborne equipment, the deployment, drop zone, landing zone, and achieving the objective. And it gives, if I skip ahead, it tells you how to jump. It gives you a bunch of, like, again, diagrams and whatnot, and like little illustrations. And generally just, in my opinion, this is going to be like super helpful, because I feel like if you're writing about something that you've never, and okay, I hate flying, okay? I hate falling. I have a fear of falling. I am never going to jump out of a plane. I will do pretty much anything to be accurate in my writing, but I will not be jumping out of a plane. This, I feel is going to be immensely helpful, especially because like it's specifically for the Second World War. And so writing a book about a paratrooper in the Second World War, this will hopefully be very helpful. And that is why I've got this. I can't give any actual, you know, input on whether or not this is useful right now, but I do feel like there is a lot of stuff in here just from the glances that I've taken that seem quite helpful. And again, there is a sources section. So I'm hoping that this is something that I get use out of, and I feel like even if it's not as helpful as I'm hoping it will be, you can never have too much information given to you, because the more information you have, the more selective you can be about what you choose and the more accurate you're likely to be. I feel like that's the way that I sort of work, is I would rather overload my brain with information that I've already heard before rather than not have enough. And especially with this book, because it's such a serious topic, I want to do it justice. So that's that. That is the last of the war books, which, believe it or not, there were only 3. The next, well, I've got 3 books here that are like autobiography type books. The first is the autobiography of Malcolm X. You can see like the tabs, I've read a little bit of this, because I actually wrote an essay about Malcolm X, and the civil rights movement, and so this is actually where I found The Fire Next Time, which I only read this year because I wanted to read it because it was the first like thing that gets said in his autobiography. But I really like Malcolm X. I think he was a really cool person, and I think he gets a very bad reputation because people are apt to do that, and not really take into consideration the facts necessarily. But I haven't read all of this, and I got this and used it for my essay when I was like 18, I think. So it's been a few years. Oh my god, it's been like 5 years. Okay, so it's been like 5 years, which is fine, but I'm gonna probably restart this from the beginning and maybe take the tabs out because I don't need them, and then read this at some point, because I do want to read it, and I think he's such an interesting person, and this is like literally he worked on this with a writer, despite the fact that he was very reticent to do so. So I'm interested to see it, and I think it maybe was one of the books that went on to inform the film about him. I don't know that for sure, but I'm interested. The second thing on the list of biography books, On the Edge by Richard Hammond. I haven't read this, but I love Richard Hammond. Well, I loved Top Gear when I was growing up. And this is basically, I think it's about generally his life, but specifically if you aren't familiar with Richard Hammond, he had a crash that nearly killed him. It was very high speed. It was like 300 and something, like it was insane. And it was really bad. And so he has been very open in this book about his experiences before, during, and after, and about how it shaped his life, and about how the stuff that came before shaped his life. It smells really good, I'm gonna just say that. But I didn't even know that he had this. Like, I didn't know he'd ever written a book, and then I saw a video of him talking to the camera about it, not the book, but like what had happened, and one of the comments on that video was like, his book is really worth reading. And so yeah, But I grew up again with Top Gear and whatnot. I also grew up with like Richard Hammond's Blast Lab. So it honestly, for me, it just makes sense that I would read the book. And I'm quite interested because it's one of those that it's somebody that I know. Obviously, I don't know him personally, but to sort of see a second side, I think would be really interesting. The third and final of the biography books, How to Talk Dirty and Influence People. This is Lenny Bruce's autobiography. It's a really awkward size. But Lenny Bruce, for anyone who doesn't know, was a comedian, a very controversial comedian who was known for being one of those people that like pushed the limit way back when it was still illegal to do a lot of things and talk about a lot of things. Like he was known for really pushing comedy. Like he was considered to be one of those like really brave, forward thinking, progressive comedians who like nowadays you'd look at what he said and did and you'd be like, that's literally not even a big deal at all. But at the time it was huge. It was like, we're gonna arrest you for that, huge. And so his autobiography, I'm just really interested to read it. Okay, so it says 1925 to 1966, because he died quite young, was a stand-up comedian, social critic, satirist, and screenwriter. His 1964 trial for obscenity and posthumous pardon is seen as a landmark for freedom of speech in the United States. So as I say, like he's known for being very progressive in the way that he just didn't care about what was proper and right. And he was influential in the way that comedy, for example, could be used to push boundaries socially. So I'm just really interested to read that. I think it's interesting. And also especially with like comedians, I feel like comedians are typically very smart people. You have to be smart to be funny is like a common belief. And I think that it'll be interesting to read a book written by a comedian. And then the final book, bit of a U-turn from the others. This is The Art of Dramatic Writing. So this book is a classic guide to writing a play. However, I am just going to be reading this and seeing if there's anything that sticks about writing generally. Because I feel like there are a lot of... It's very floppy. There are a lot of books that... There are a lot of books that I think when you read them sometimes it may not necessarily directly apply to you, but the advice is very helpful. Writing a play, I think one of the benefits of playwriting is that you learn how to use brief descriptions of, you know, the actions that people take, how to really boil down something to its core, to make speech more impactful, to make the things that people do a very clear show of their character, to use space and whatnot. And so I feel like a book about that might be very helpful generally in writing. And I feel like everything that I've said so far, it's not been super descriptive and I feel kind of awful about it, but I do believe fully that those books that I really liked were very good. I believe these books will hopefully be very good, or at the very least the experience of reading them will be interesting and worth, you know, the time. And a lot of them aren't actually very long as well. Like apart from the World War II books, which tend to be quite beefy because they obviously, there's a lot about it, but apart from like that, most of them are quite slim. And I think that's true for a lot of my nonfiction, is that they're like less than 400 pages. So I think honestly, what I'm trying to say is that I put off reading nonfiction for a really long time for reasons that didn't make any sense, even though I knew that I loved learning about stuff and that I loved reading. like, it's so stupid. And I just think if you're somebody who has never tried reading nonfiction, give it a go. Honestly, I feel like it is so much more worth it than maybe you think. And as somebody who really did believe, for whatever reason, that I was just never going to be able to read a nonfiction book without getting bored, I recommend doing it. I recommend doing it anyway. I recommend trying really hard to find that perfect nonfiction book, because there are different types of nonfiction prose. Um, you know, the sort of the kind like David Gran and Max Hastings, the kind like Saul David. I think that there's, a Benny Collins, a Matt Wyman, honestly, just there is a nonfiction book out there for you, I believe. And I don't know, I'm excited. I'm gonna say now, like, on the books that I've been writing and the book that I'm planning on writing, I have a bit of an update that I need to film with regards to Filmation Lab, the querying journey, and the way that that is impacting Project Vampire. I then will also talk about this World War II project a little bit, and because that's the next one that I'm going to be writing. So hopefully I'll clear stuff up there, because a lot's been going on, and it's not like progress, but it's progress, and the only reason I haven't talked about it is because I honestly just have been so busy. I've been overrun lately. I feel like I'm losing my grip a bit, but I'm starting to get that back. So I'll be sure to do that soon, and I'm hoping that these books that I've been reading and the books that I'm planning on reading will continue to help me understand the books that I'm writing and make it as good as they can be. So yeah, thank you for watching if you got this far. I feel really stupid for not reading nonfiction sooner, and I think if there's anything that you've ever done reading wise where you've maybe ignored a genre, or you've been kind of afraid of trying to write a genre perhaps because you feel like you're not educated enough, I honestly just cannot recommend enough diving in, because it's so much better than you think it's going to be. Like, I was like, oh god, what if I hate it? And here I am, and I'm like obsessed. So that is it, I think. Hopefully next time I will have a video where I talk about my books specifically. But yeah, thank you for watching, and bye.